When we think of the Wild West, it's always cowboys rounding up cattle or riding off into the sunset. But that's only half the story. Beyond the dust and saloons were the gunslingers. The fearless, the dangerous, and the unpredictable figures who truly defined the untamed frontier. These weren't the random people you'd find in a history book. Their stories were too wild, chaotic, or buried in legend to make the cut. Their names might not be famous, but their lives shaped the very heart of the Wild West, raw, relentless, and untamed. This is where the grit lies, in the forgotten tales of those who lived by their own rules and carved their legends with a steady hand and a loaded gun. Today, we will uncover the chaos, the rivalries, and the untold stories of gunslingers that made the Wild West what it was. This isn't the polished version of history. It's the side you've been waiting to hear. In the dusty chaos of the Old West, few names evoke as much mystery and intrigue as Billy the Kid. Born as Henry McCarty in 1859, this infamous gunslinger lived a brief but explosive life that cemented his legacy in American folklore. Billy wasn't born into the outlaw lifestyle. In fact, his childhood was marked by poverty and instability. After his father's disappearance, his mother moved him and his brother to the rough frontier of New Mexico. Unfortunately, tragedy followed when his mother succumbed to tuberculosis, leaving young Henry an orphan at the age of 14. Billy quickly learned that survival meant adapting to the harsh world around him. His descent into crime began with petty theft, but it didn't take long for the stakes to rise. By 17, Billy had reportedly killed a man in self-defense during a saloon brawl. From there, his reputation grew. The kid was known for his youthful charm and cunning, but he also had an unparalleled ability with a revolver. He was said to be able to draw and shoot so fast that many opponents never stood a chance. What truly made Billy the Kid a legend was his involvement in the Lincoln County War, a violent conflict in New Mexico between rival cattle barons. Billy joined a group of vigilantes called the Regulators and quickly gained a reputation as a fearless and lethal gunman. He was credited with multiple killings during the conflict, earning the wrath of powerful enemies. Billy's life ended as dramatically as it unfolded. He was hunted relentlessly by Sheriff Pat Garrett, who finally cornered and killed him in 1881 at the age of 21. Despite his short life, Billy's legend lives on. Was he a misunderstood hero of the oppressed or a cold-blooded killer? Historians still debate. One thing is certain, though. Billy the Kid symbolized the Wild West's unforgiving spirit, a young man whose life became a tale of survival, rebellion, and the price of infamy. When you think of the quintessential gunslinger, Wild Bill Hickok is the first name that comes to mind. A man of many titles, lawman, gambler, scout, showman, and much more. Wild Bill carved his name into the annals of the Wild West through grit and a deadly aim. Born James Butler Hickok in 1837 in Illinois, his early life didn't exactly scream. He grew up working on his family farm. He later became a stagecoach driver, but his life would change forever when he headed west to Kansas. Wild Bill first earned his reputation as a Union spy and scout during the Civil War. But it was after the war, during his time as a lawman in places like Hays and Abilene, Kansas, that his fame truly exploded. Hickok had a no-nonsense approach to keeping order. With his twin Colt pistols holstered on his hips, he patrolled the rowdy cowtowns with an iron grip. His sharpshooting skills were legend. There's a story of Wild Bill taking down 3 men in a single gunfight, each with a bullet square to the heart. Tales like this turned him into a larger-than-life figure, whether exaggerated or true. Beyond his skills with a gun, Wild Bill was a complex character. He was a gambler at heart, spending much of his time in saloons playing poker, which eventually led to his untimely death. In 1876, while holding a pair of aces and eights, a hand now known as the Dead Man's Hand, Wild Bill was shot in the back of the head by a drifter named Jack McCall. It was a dishonorable end for a man who faced countless enemies head-on. Wild Bill Hickok's life was equal parts heroism and controversy. While some saw him as a necessary enforcer of frontier law, others viewed him as a trigger-happy killer. Whatever the truth, his name became synonymous with the Wild West, a symbol of a dangerous and untamed era. If loyalty and skill were the hallmarks of a great gunslinger, Doc Holliday easily earned his place in history. Born John Henry Holiday in 1851 in Georgia, he wasn't always the deadly figure we associate with the Wild West. Doc was a highly educated man who trained as a dentist, a far cry from the saloons and shootouts that would later define his life. But life took a hard turn when Holiday was diagnosed with tuberculosis in his early 20s, a disease that would ultimately shape his fate. Seeking the dry climate of the American Southwest to ease his symptoms, Doc traded dental tools for a sick shooter. His life spiraled into one of gambling, drinking, and violence. Despite his illness, Holiday's quick wit and quicker draw made him a formidable presence in the saloons of Texas and Arizona. He preferred poker over politics and wasn't afraid to settle disputes with Lynn. Doc's most famous chapter began when he befriended Wyatt Earp. The two became inseparable, and their bond led to one of the most iconic moments in Wild West history, the gunfight at OK Corral. On October 26, 1881, in Tombstone, Arizona, Doc stood shoulder to shoulder with the Earp brothers as they faced the Clanton-McClory gang. In just 30 seconds, nearly 30 shots were fired, leaving 3 men dead. Doc's fearless presence and deadly aim were crucial in securing victory for the Earps. Despite his heroics, Doc's health continued to deteriorate. He spent his final years in Colorado, where he died at the age of 36. Doc Holliday remains one of the most enigmatic figures of the Wild West. This man faced death every day, whether from tuberculosis or a smoking gun. When it comes to Wild West gunslingers, Jesse James commands both fear and fascination. Born in 1847 in Missouri, Jesse's early years were shaped by the turbulence of the American Civil War. The war left deep scars on the young Jesse as Union soldiers tore his family apart. This chaos would be the foundation for the ruthless and cunning gunslinger he would become. Jesse's path to infamy began when he joined a Confederate guerrilla group, Quantrill's Raiders. These brutal fighters waged a bloody campaign of terror across the border states. By the time the war ended, Jesse was already accustomed to violence. Instead of laying down his arms, he used his skills to create one of the most feared outlaw gangs in history, the James Younger Gang. The gang specialized in robbing banks, stagecoaches, and trains, often targeting Union-controlled institutions. Jesse had a unique way of blending ruthlessness with a sense of rebellion. To some, he was a folk hero, a Robin Hood figure striking back against the post-war establishment. But the truth was far less romantic. Jesse's raids left a trail of blood, and he showed no or little mercy to those who stood in his way. Jesse's life was filled with betrayal and paranoia. After years of evading lawmen and bounty hunters, his story came to an abrupt and shocking end in 1882. After breakfast on April 3rd, 1882, James walked across the living room and laid his revolvers on a sofa. He turned around, noticed a dusty picture above the mantel, and stood on a chair to clean it. Robert Ford, a trusted gang member, drew his weapon and shot the unarmed Jesse James in the back of the head. All this happened after the Ford brothers and betrayer negotiated a $5,000 bounty placed on Jesse James by the then governor of Missouri. If ever there was a man who embodied the chaos and violence of the Wild West, It was John Wesley Hardin. Born in 1853 in Texas, Hardin was raised in a deeply religious household, but his life would take a sharp turn away from the values instilled by his preacher father. By the age of 15, Hardin had already killed his first man in a dispute that quickly escalated. This was no isolated incident. It was the beginning of a deadly career that left a trail of bodies across the frontier. Hardin was notorious for his short temper and lethal skill with a revolver. He claimed to have killed over 40 men during his lifetime, though historians believe the actual number may be lower. Still, there's no denying that Hardin was one of the deadliest gunslingers of his time. Trivial disagreements often sparked his killings, and he showed little remorse for the lives he took. One infamous incident occurred when Hardin reportedly shot a man for snoring too loudly in a neighboring hotel room. Whether exaggerated or not, this story tells the tale of a man who saw violence as a solution to even the smallest grievance. Despite his murderous reputation, Hardin managed to evade capture for years, often using cunning disguises and aliases to stay one step ahead of the law. In 1877, Hardin's luck ran out. He was captured and sentenced to 25 years in prison for killing a lawman. While behind bars, he claimed to have studied law and even wrote his autobiography. But prison didn't change Hardin. Upon his release in 1894, he quickly returned to his old ways. His life came to an abrupt end in 1895 when he was shot in the back by John Selman, a lawman with a grudge. Without a name like Wyatt Earp, the story of gunslingers in the Wild West isn't complete. Still, unlike many of his contemporaries, Earp wasn't defined by lawlessness. Instead, he built his reputation as a lawman, gambler, and man who thrived in the gray areas of morality. Born in 1848 in Illinois, Wyatt grew up in a large family that valued hard work and resilience. His early life was unremarkable. He worked odd jobs and briefly tried his hand at gold mining before heading west to make his mark. Earp's journey to fame began in law enforcement. He served as a deputy marshal in Dodge City, Kansas, a rough-and-tumble cow town teeming with outlaws and drifters. Wyatt's calm demeanor and skill with a six-shooter quickly earned him respect and fear. He was a man who didn't waste words or bullets. But it was in Tombstone, Arizona, that Wyatt's legend was truly forged. In 1881, Wyatt, his brothers Virgil and Morgan, and his close friend Doc Holiday were embroiled in a feud with the Clanton and McClory families. This conflict led to the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral, a 30-second blaze of gunfire that left 3 men dead and solidified Wyatt Earp's place in history. The shootout wasn't as clear-cut as the movies portray. Questions of legality and morality lingered, but Wyatt's decisive role in the fight turned him into a symbol of frontier justice. Wyatt's later years were far less dramatic. He moved west again, dabbling in gold mining and saloon ventures, and even acting as a consultant for early Hollywood westerns. Despite his efforts to shape his legacy, Wyatt Earp remains controversial. To some, he was the ultimate lawman, a symbol of order in a chaotic world. To others, he was an opportunist who operated on the fine line between heroism and self-interest. When talking about legendary gunslingers, one name often overlooked is Bass Reeves. However, his story is arguably one of the most remarkable of the Old West. Born into slavery in 1838, in Arkansas, Bass Reeves' life began under the shadow of oppression. But after escaping to freedom during the Civil War, Reeves carved out an extraordinary path as one of the first black U.S. deputy marshals west of the Mississippi. Reeves was a giant, standing over 6 feet tall. His commanding presence struck fear into criminals and respect into those who worked alongside him. Fluent in multiple Native American languages, Reeves operated in the Indian Territory, in modern-day Oklahoma, a rugged, lawless region teeming with outlaws. His jurisdiction spanned over 75,000 square miles, making his job one of the toughest in the West. Armed with a pair of Colt pistols, Reeves apprehended more than 3,000 criminals during his career, an astonishing number that few lawmen could rival. His methods were as brilliant as they were fearless. Bass often used disguises to infiltrate outlaw hideouts, posing as everything from a tramp to a farmer, to catch his targets off guard. His ability to outwit his enemies earned him a reputation as one of the most resourceful and relentless lawmen of his time. Despite his achievements, Reeves operated in a society rife with racism. Yet, he defied the odds with his dedication to justice. He was known for his strict moral code, refusing bribes and ensuring fairness, even in a world that wasn't fair to him. Reeves' career spanned over 3 decades, and he retired as a respected figure. However, his legacy was largely forgotten for years. A gunslinger whose unpredictability made him both feared and infamous was Clay Allison. Born in 1841 in Tennessee, Allison was a Confederate soldier during the Civil War. Still, his post-war life was far from peaceful, suffering from what some historians believe were untreated mental health issues. Likely PTSD, Allison earned a reputation as one of the most volatile gunslingers of the Wild West. What set Allison apart wasn't his skill alone, but his sheer unpredictability. He was known for his fiery temper and love of alcohol, a dangerous combination in the rough-and-tumble saloons of Texas and New Mexico. Allison didn't become a lawman or lead a gang, unlike other gunslingers. Instead, he operated on the fringes of society, often picking fights and settling disputes with deadly precision. One of his most infamous acts was a duel with Chunk Colbert. After a meal together, the two drew pistols, and Allison killed Colbert, later stating, "I didn't want to kill him, but he insisted on it." This casual attitude toward violence earned him both notoriety and respect. But Allison's legend wasn't all brutality. He was known for his bizarre humor, once tying a rival to a tree and forcing him to dance by shooting at his feet. Another time, he allegedly decapitated a man he believed to be a murderer and paraded the head through town, a chilling reminder of the lengths he would go to enforce his version of justice. Allison's life came to a sudden end in 1887, not in a gunfight, but in a tragic accident. He fell from a wagon and was crushed beneath its wheel. While his death lacked the drama of his life, his legacy as a man who lived and fought on his terms remains one of the more colorful tales of the Wild West. Tom Hohn's life straddled the thin line between heroism and villainy, making him one of the most controversial figures in Wild West history. Born in 1860 in Missouri, Horn spent early years as a cattle rancher and scout, but his knack for tracking and survival soon led him into a darker profession, hired gunman. Horn began his career as a scout for the U.S. Army, earning accolades for capturing Apache leader Geronimo. But his work as a range detective cemented his reputation. Hired by wealthy cattle barons to handle cattle rustlers, Horn's methods were brutal and uncompromising. He was known for his skill with a rifle, often taking down his targets from incredible distances, earning him a fearsome reputation. However, Horn's sense of justice was as cold as the steel of his Winchester. His work often blurred the lines between law enforcement and murder for hire, with accusations that he sometimes targeted innocent men to please his employer. The most infamous chapter of his life was in 1901, when he was accused of killing 14-year-old Willie Nickel, the son of a sheep farmer, involved in a land dispute with local cattlemen. Horn's conviction was based on a drunken confession overheard by a deputy. Still, many historians believe the evidence against him was circumstantial at best. Despite protests of his innocence, Horn was sentenced to death by hanging, and his execution in 1903 marked the end of a life filled with both valor and violence. But Masterson's story is one of resilience, resourcefulness, and reinvention, qualities that set him apart from the blood-soaked legends of the Wild West. Born William Barclay Masterson in 1853 in Quebec, Canada, Bat grew up in a large, hard-working family that eventually settled in Kansas. It didn't take long for him to make a name for himself in the chaotic frontier towns, where opportunity and danger often walked hand in hand. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Bat was not solely defined by gunfights or bloodshed. He had many talents, including being a buffalo hunter, gambler, lawman, journalist, and sports writer. However, his reputation as a gunslinger carved his place in Western lore. His first taste of fame came in 1876, during the Battle of Adobe Wall. Bat fought against Comanche warriors in one of the last major Native American uprisings on the plains. His bravery and sharp shooting during the siege solidified his reputation as a man who could hold his own despite overwhelming odds. Bat later became a lawman, serving as a sheriff in Ford County, Kansas, and a marshal in Dodge City, where he worked alongside Wyatt Earp. While many lawmen of the era operated in the gray areas of morality, Bat stood out for his measured approach to justice. He wasn't quick to draw his gun unless necessary, preferring diplomacy and strategy over brute force. Yet when he did pull the trigger, it was with deadly accuracy. What made Bat truly unique was his ability to evolve with the times. As the Wild West began to fade, Bat left the frontier behind and reinvented himself in New York City as a prominent sports journalist. He traded his revolver for a typewriter, chronicling the rise of boxing and leaving behind a legacy that spanned far beyond the dusty streets of Kansas. That wraps up today's episode of Native Journal. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more updates. See you in the next video.